Shalom, salam, Islam, peace and love. All right, so what we're focusing on today is about a page and a half of literature from the book Ancient and Modern Britons, written by David McRitchie in 1881. What you want to do is focus on the ability to harness focus, so that way you can create points of reference in your mind for long durations of time. After reading several sources, several books, you will then be able to create connections and then see through the veil of lies. So I'm going to show you something that's going to destroy the whole concept of so-called race. That's what we're hopping into. So stick along and allow your consciousness to expand. Let's go. Beginning on page 14. He also points to the evidence of the existence in Italy of races which were neither Aryan nor Semitic, under the various names of Aborigines, Sicily, Liguri, Umbri, etc. And he also suggests that the Phoenicians were of this copper-colored hue. It is perhaps scarcely correct to describe this as a third division of dark-skinned people, for Signor Generali's quote-unquote red is not very different from Professor Huxley's quote-unquote chocolate brown. The colors ascribed by each to the ancient Egyptians. The connection between this last theory and the consideration of quote-unquote ancient Britons becomes apparent when one remembers that not only are these people allied to the Egyptians as being both Australoids, quote-unquote, but there is also a legend that the Scots are of Egyptian descent. While of the Phoenician intercourse with Britain, there is no doubt. However, the red color of the Phoenician seems only a suggestion. As with the Iberians, according to M.D. Arbois de Jubainville, this red race of the Italian antiquary is assumed to have come into Europe out of the sunken island continent of Atlantis, which our grandfathers spoke of as the fabled quote-unquote Atlantis, but which the voyage of the Challenger and the study of geology have both proved to be no fable. The point of difference between scientific men now seems to be rather than probable, rather the probable date of the subsidence of that continent, which it is contended by some must be so remote as to preclude the possibility of establishing a race connection between the two continents in this way. But at any rate, there are several reasons for believing that the unidentified builders of our stone circles, cairns, and dolmens were dark-skinned people, and the races with which they have most similarity are Professor Huxley's Australoids and Negritos. Beginning on page 19, the bottom of it actually, the two great divisions of Professor Huxley are so closely intermingled that it can scarcely be invidious to dwell upon the disagreeable features of this line of the quote-unquote dark white ancestry, for the two types in a vast number of cases find representatives under one family roof, so that you shall see the rosy-cheeked, blue-eyed, golden-haired sister and the dark-skinned, black-haired, dark-eyed brother playing amicably side by side. The types are not extinct, but they are represented by the one united people. Besides, although it is proposed in these pages to ascertain if happily there be any good reasons for believing that the British Australoids were as swarthy as any other branches of that family. Yet, even to prove this would do nothing to prove that the clear-skinned, quote-unquote, fair whites had not an equally humble lineage. The abject and hideous race of Hottentots encountered by Serpa Pinto were white-skinned men, and he assigned them the very lowest place in the scale of humanity. And at any rate, if the theory of evolution be a true one, it is evident that the origin of all the human families must unquestionably be humble, whether white or black. Further, the incidental feature of complexion is of little importance ethnologically, since it is the anatomical construction that determines the rank of the being, human or otherwise. Not only are the two types closely intermingled as to color, but the irregular and less pleasing characteristics of the quote-unquote Australoid may be easily detected even in families whose complexion would of itself proclaim them to be pure anthropoid. We have all a pretty fair idea of the kind of face belonging to this latter division, a perfect specimen, if it is such as the painters give to Adam or to the angels, and such a face is exquisitely handsome. But many who seem at first to belong exclusively to this division cannot undergo successfully a closer scrutiny. One has the quote unquote coarse and flexible mouth of the Australoid, another shows his kinship to that race in the formation of his upper jaw or in the shape and size of his teeth, while a third has the short, flat nose of the Mongoloid and the Australoid. The hair, though light in color, may be as crisp and curly as a Negro's, and other race signs alien to the purest quote unquote fair white may be visible in the natural growth of the beard or in its scantiness or its total absence. All of these marks may be detected among men who, at first glance, appear to be Xanthroid, and they proclaim a mixed lineage quite as indisputably as does a tawny complexion or raven hair. You may see faces of distinctly Mongolian and even a Negroid cast in families whose pedigree may be traced for many generations without disclosing the slightest hint of extra British blood. It may be only in the structure of the head and jaw, the complexion being clear red and white and the eyes blue, or it may be the structure and complexion both that this resemblance is visible. Since, therefore, the least handsome of the physical attributes of our heterogeneous nation are shared in some degree by the most of its members, there can be little fault in specifying particular localities and their inhabitants where it may be convenient to do so. Indeed, this has been done over and over again. Thackeray, for example, notices the quote unquote flat Tartar faces and squat figures of the southwestern Irish. A recent writer dwells upon the fact that in certain districts of England, where the names of the towns occupied the country in overwhelming numbers, the descendants of a race not unlike the modern Eskimo are still found, the Hebrideans, who will be referred to more particularly are described by another writer as being very Mongolian in feature, and indeed, the prominent cheekbones that form a most striking feature of the Mongoloid are regarded by many as the attribute of every quote unquote Scotchman. But as that word is often loosely used to designate any native of Scotland or of whatever lineage, this feature need only be the property of certain Scottish tribes. So far as complexion goes, there can be no doubt as to the presence of a vast infusion of quote unquote colored blood. There are, of course, no living Britons who are as black as Negroes, but some are as dark as mulattoes. And many darker than Chinamen. To regard ourselves in the mass as unquote as quote unquote white people, except in a comparative degree, is quite a mistake. All right, so what we just discovered is that the concept of race doesn't make sense because first of all, there's a point of origin in which all human beings stemmed from, and then second of all, there's several mixing points. So therefore, the whole concept of race is ambiguous at best. All right. Secondly, what we have in legalese is black means illegitimate and white means sovereign. So if we're going to go on to continue and use complexions to describe people, it would be the so-called black people that are actually the sovereigns of this landmass if they repatriate with their nation and then proclaim their nationality. So therefore, the whole concept of using complexions to describe people becomes a very convoluted and inferior style of description because it would be the so-called black people that we've been describing up until now that would then be the free white people after they repatriate to their nation. So you see how confusing that gets? And what would that demote white people into being? And they would still be citizens, which would mean that you are a slave to the corporation of the United States. So you would actually be the so-called black people. So it instantly inverts as soon as the proclamation of nationality begins to take place on the side of Moorish Americans. You see? So with all that being said, meditate on that throughout the day and allow yourself to grow and allow yourself to to become greater than you've ever been. All right. Peace and love.